Here's a number, August 15th, 1971. Remember that date. Because on that morning, a president walked into a television studio, looked into a camera, and made a decision that would quietly drain the savings of every person alive today, and every person not yet born. Most people have never heard of that moment. Most people don't know it happened. And yet, it is the single most important financial event of the last 100 years, and it is running in the background of every grocery bill, every rent increase, every paycheck that somehow feels smaller than it did 3 years ago, even though the number on it went up. Let's start somewhere smaller. Let's start at a checkout line. You're buying the same things you always buy: eggs, bread, olive oil, maybe a pack of coffee. And somewhere between the conveyor belt and the card reader, you do the math in your head, the way you always do. And the number is wrong, not a little wrong, noticeably, uncomfortably wrong. You don't say anything. The cashier doesn't say anything. The person behind you doesn't say anything. Everyone just pays and leaves. And outside, in the parking lot, you sit in your car for a second and think, what is happening to my money? That feeling is not anxiety. That feeling is not innumeracy. That feeling is you correctly detecting something real. A slow, invisible, perfectly legal process that transfers wealth out of your pocket and into someone else's without a single transaction you can point to. It has a name. And once you understand how it actually works, you will never look at a price tag the same way again. Inflation. The word sounds almost boring. Prices go up, you've been told. That's just how economies work. But here's the part nobody explains. Inflation isn't a weather event. It isn't something that just happens like rain. It is a mechanism, a system. And like all systems, it was designed. And it benefits someone. The question is whether that someone is you. To understand why your money is disappearing, you have to go back. Not to 2021, not to COVID, not to the supply chain. You have to go back to when money stopped being a thing and became a promise. For most of human history, money was anchored. A dollar was backed by gold. Physical, heavy, finite gold, locked in a vault in Fort Knox. If you held a dollar, you held a claim on something real. The system had a ceiling. Governments could only spend what they had, or close to it, because every dollar they printed had to be matched by metal. This kept inflation contained. It kept governments honest. It also kept them frustrated. Because here's the problem with gold. It doesn't care about war. It doesn't care about politics. It doesn't care that you need to rebuild Europe after World War II, or fund a war in Vietnam, or create a welfare state that wins you the next election. Gold just sits there and says, no, you don't have enough of me. You can't print more. So in 1971, Nixon said, fine, we're done with gold. He called it a temporary measure. It was not temporary. On August 15th, he announced that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate. The dollar, overnight, became what economists call fiat currency. It exists because the government says it exists. It is backed by nothing except the collective agreement that it is worth something. And from that moment forward, the ceiling was gone. Governments could print. And they did. In 1971, total global debt was a few trillion dollars. By 2000, it was 80 trillion. Today, 320 trillion. That is not growth. That is a species that learned it could borrow against the future and just never stopped. But here's what that means for you specifically, for the money sitting in your account right now. Every time a government prints more currency, every dollar that already exists becomes slightly less scarce. And things that are less scarce become less valuable. This is not a theory. This is arithmetic. If there are 10 apples in a room and you hold one, you hold 10% of all the apples. If someone walks in and creates 10 more apples out of thin air, you now hold 5%. You didn't lose anything. You didn't spend anything. But you are poorer. That is inflation. That is exactly what happens to currency. And it moves slowly enough that most people never catch it in real time. You catch it in retrospect. You catch it in that checkout line moment, looking at the eggs thinking, wait, when did this happen? Let's get more specific. Because there are different kinds of inflation and they hit differently. There's demand-pull inflation, when too much money chases too few goods. This is the most classic version. COVID stimulus checks hit bank accounts in 2020 and 2021. The government sent one $200, then $600, then $1,300 directly to hundreds of millions of people. People spent it. But the factories that make things were shut down. The ships that carry things were backed up. The supply of stuff contracted while the supply of money expanded massively. Basic economics. Prices went up. Not because anyone was being greedy, because demand was running ahead of supply and money was abundant. Then there's cost-push inflation, when it costs more to make things, so everything gets more expensive. Energy prices spike because of a war, because of an OPEC decision, because of a pipeline being shut down, and suddenly the cost of making, shipping, refrigerating, and selling everything goes up simultaneously. And those costs don't stay with the manufacturer. They come directly to you, at the register, silently. And then there's the one almost nobody talks about: currency debasement. The slow, structural kind. The kind that has been running since 1971. The kind where the purchasing power of your currency erodes not because of a specific event, but because of the relentless, low-grade expansion of the money supply over decades. The dollar has lost roughly 87% of its purchasing power since 1971, meaning the dollar you hold today would have been worth about $7.60 in 1971 money. The salary that felt comfortable 20 years ago now feels tight. That's not lifestyle inflation. That's money becoming worth less, steadily, invisibly, by design. Here's the transfer. Because this is the part that changes how you see everything. Inflation is not equally distributed. It does not hurt everyone the same way. When the money supply expands, the new money enters the economy at a specific point, usually through government spending or through banks. The people closest to that entry point benefit first, before prices have had time to adjust. They buy assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, at yesterday's prices. Then inflation ripples outward. By the time it reaches a salaried worker, prices have already moved. Wages adjust slowly, if at all. And the person holding cash, actual cash, in a savings account, watches their purchasing power quietly erode while the person holding assets watches their net worth quietly expand. This is not a conspiracy. It is arithmetic. It is the inevitable result of expanding the money supply in an economy where wealth is unequally distributed. The rich hold assets. The poor and middle class hold cash and wages. Inflation taxes the second group to subsidize the first. Every time, without exception. Look at what happened in Venezuela. By 2019, inflation was running at 9,586%. That number doesn't mean anything until you translate it. Coffee that cost 2,300 bolivars in the morning costs 6,000 by afternoon. People stopped carrying wallets and started carrying bags, literal bags of cash, just to buy a loaf of bread. And then the cash became so worthless that people stopped using it entirely. Zimbabwe hit 79.6 billion% monthly inflation in 2008. They eventually abandoned their own currency and started using US dollars because their own money had become meaningless paper. These aren't edge cases. These aren't primitive economies that made simple mistakes. These are countries that followed the same logic, print money to solve problems, and hit the wall at the end of that road. And the wall is always the same. When people stop trusting the currency dies. Hyperinflation isn't just economic failure. It's the moment a society discovers that money was never real. It was always a collective agreement, and the agreement has broken down. Prices spiral. Savings vanish. A lifetime of work becomes worth the paper it's printed on. Literally. Greece didn't hyperinflate. Greece just stopped being trusted. In 2010, investors looked at Greece's debt levels and decided they no longer believed Greece could pay them back. So they stopped buying Greek bonds. The money tap shut off. And the austerity that followed was not a policy choice. It was a forced confession that the debt had already been made and someone had to absorb the cost. 1 in 4 public workers lost their jobs. Wages fell 30%. GDP shrank 25% in 5 years. 200,000 young Greeks left the country. Engineers, doctors, graduates, just gone. The economy didn't recover for a decade. And here's the cruelest part. Greece's debt didn't go down, it went up. Because when your economy collapses, you collect less in taxes, which means you have to borrow more just to survive. The trap closes from every direction simultaneously. Now bring it home. Because this isn't just about governments and countries and numbers in the trillions. This is about your savings account. If inflation runs at 4% a year, which is roughly where it's been in recent history, and your savings account earns 0.5% interest, you are losing 3.5% of your real purchasing power every single year. You are not losing the number. The number in your account stays the same or even grows slightly. But what that number can actually buy, the groceries, the rent, the car repair, is shrinking. Every year, silently. The number feels safe. The reality is not. And here's the question I keep coming back to. The one that doesn't have a clean answer. We built a financial system that requires growth to function. Not just economic growth. Exponential, compounding, relentless growth forever. Debt must be repaid with interest. That interest requires new money. That new money requires new debt. The machine only stays running if it keeps accelerating. And inflation is the exhaust. It is the unavoidable byproduct of a system that cannot stop expanding. Stop expanding, and the debt becomes unpayable. Keep expanding, and the currency slowly loses meaning. There is no neutral gear. There is no steady state. The machine runs or it crashes. Right now, central banks around the world are trying to thread that needle, raising interest rates to slow inflation, hoping not to trigger the recession that follows when borrowing gets expensive. It is the most precise, most consequential, most underreported balancing act happening in the world today. And it is happening with your savings, your mortgage, your salary, your future as the variables. So here's what you should be sitting with. The money in your account is not a fixed thing. It is not stored value in the way a jar of honey stores sweetness or a photograph stores a moment. It is a position in a dynamic system, a system that is always moving, always transferring, always redistributing. And the people who understand how that system works are positioned on one side of that transfer. The people who don't are positioned on the other. You now understand how it works. What you do with that is the next question. And it's a harder one. But it starts here, in a parking lot, holding a receipt, realizing the math was never wrong. The math was always right. You just hadn't been told what equation you were actually solving.